GamingBolt presents 10 most difficult games of 2016. There's something special about games that crush your soul with unforgiving difficulty. Sure, they're not for everyone. There's a lot of people out there who just want to enjoy the experience, or seeing how the story the game is telling pans out. And that is completely understandable. But there is something cathartic and intensely satisfying about beating a game that has battered you into submission with its maddening difficulty. Their perfect balance between being extremely hard to master and yet being fair at the same time lends an incredible amount of undeniable value to the game's design. And there's just something extremely appealing about games that put their focus first and foremost on that aspect. In fact, there's an entire market built around these games now. And while the market doesn't permeate mainstream culture the way that games such as Call of Duty or FIFA do, it's still amassing popularity with each passing day. 2016 saw the release of a bunch of games that towed the line between being frustrating and perfectly fair. Here, we've compiled a list of what we feel are 10 games that came out in 2016 that did this better than others. Dark Souls 3. Well, of course we would kick things off with the most obvious choice. We've already spoken about how these soul-crushing games, obvious pun is obvious, have been carving out a niche for themselves in the gaming industry. And this charge is spearheaded, at least in terms of popularity and sheer quality, by From Software's Soul franchise. After what was considered by fans to be a slightly diluted entry in the series with Dark Souls 2, Souls 3 was a sort of return to form, offering the excellent game design that the series has come to be known for, and combining it with the excellent reaction-based combat that wowed one and all in the excellent Bloodborne. In our review of the game, we said that Dark Souls 3 is brutal, and that it will make you revel in your suffering. And honestly, that is perhaps the best way to describe this game. Fire Emblem Fates Conquest. Fire Emblem Fates Conquest is an extremely challenging game on a fundamental level, and much more so in fact than its sister version Birthright. There is a deep sense of strategy involved in the game's battles, and that it demands you to stop, think, and plan ahead. All throughout the 30-plus hour playthrough, you get the feeling that your army is fighting with odds heavily stacked against them. Every victory, be it something as tiny as one of your units going head-on against a tough enemy unit and coming out victorious, or something as major as an entire battle, gives you an incredible feeling of swelling satisfaction and pride. The fact that, unlike Birthright, Conquest gives you next to zero opportunities to grind and level up outside of the main story makes the difficulty even more intense. While the game is challenging, it's rarely unfair. Sure, Conquest demands a certain level of strategy and tactical thinking from its players, but it always gives you the necessary tools to deal with the situation on hand, no matter how desperate it may seem. XCOM 2. XCOM 2 is, perhaps along with Fire Emblem Fates, one of the best tactical RPGs to have been released in the last few years. And it's no coincidence that both of these games, when they are at their best, are unforgivingly difficult. Sure, the case can be made that XCOM 2 is at times, perhaps a bit too unforgiving, but it's that very nature of its difficulty that makes it such a rewarding and ultimately satisfying experience. While XCOM 2 developers Firaxis have created a game that provides an amazing and relentlessly trying level of difficulty, which, depending on how patient you are as a gamer, may or may not keep you coming back for more. Darkest Dungeon. Don't ever be fooled by first impressions. At first glance, Darkest Dungeon's art style makes it look like an extremely accessible and fairly simplistic game, but that could not be further from the truth. The game is merciless, brutal, and relentless in its attempts of battering you into submission, and this unforgiving difficulty makes the experience of playing Darkest Dungeon one of, first and foremost, surviving. The game boasts of tense battles that will terrify and enthrall you at the same time, and victories that will make you feel like a giant. Coming up against monstrosities that this game throws against you and emerging victorious makes this one of the most rewarding experiences in recent memory, and it's no great surprise, as a result, that Darkest Dungeon is also among the best games of the year. Salt and Sanctuary. Salt and Sanctuary can be described in extremely simplistic terms as a 2D ode to From Software's Souls games. And while that sounds like a bizarre combination at first, you wouldn't be blamed for thinking that such a blend can't work very well. Salt and Sanctuary ultimately delivers an experience that captures the maddening and challenging spirit of the Dark Souls series perfectly, while also managing to carve out a distinct identity of its own. This RPG has its own unique flavor and atmosphere, and it pulls you into its world right from the get-go with its blend of unique and beautiful art styles and its fair yet unforgiving difficulty. Essentially, considering the fact that it borrows features essential to the Souls games heavily, it is very much an ode rather than a new take on an old and loved style of games. But it is still a game that deserves to be played by fans of From Software's series. Battle-Right. It's almost unfair how overlooked this game has been as compared to some of the other big releases this year, because Battle-Right is, in simple terms, an absolute blast. Battle-Right is a team arena brawler that pits two teams of 3 warriors, each of different classes, against others in a single gladiator-style arena, and the battles that ensue are frantic and thrilling. Without the distraction of anything like items to be used in the middle of battles, your mastery over the skills the game has to offer for each class is all the edge you get over your other opponents. And this makes for some exciting, fast-paced battles that are only as difficult as you let them be. It's a simplistic concept that is executed almost to perfection, and its requirement for you to master all of the skills you can to make the game challenging but fair. Hyper Light Drifter. While Hyper Light Drifter can, in quite bare terms, be called an ode to the 16-bit era of action-adventure games that was pioneered by The Legend of Zelda, it is actually so much more. It's a wonderfully well-designed experience with the kind of frustratingly challenging combat that both works in and against its favor at times. The game is difficult in the simplest ways imaginable, not because of mind-bending puzzles or because of its mechanics, but simply thanks to the sheer number of enemies it throws at you in a single encounter, and how it demands you to clear all of these enemies using the numerous abilities and weapons you acquire throughout the course of the game. It's by no means a perfect game, and its combat and grueling difficulty can be frustrating at times, but it's ultimately an extremely rewarding experience that should not be missed. Fury. What a hidden gem this was, and it's a shame that it slipped under the radar for so many gamers. Fury is a game that centers entirely on boss fights, and it's absolutely nothing else at all. And as such, it makes those fights feel exactly the way that they should. Challenging, grueling encounters with the odds stacked heavily against you, but never ever in an unfair, imbalanced way. They are, after all, boss fights. The fast-paced and precise combat is slickly presented and thrilling to experience, and while it's tough to master in terms of timing and combining your moves, Fury always pushes you to try and try again until you get better and finally defeat your foes. The fact that the boss fights themselves are immaculately designed only makes them that much better and more challenging. Bullshot. Bullshot is an indie-developed, nostalgia-fueled, retro-style run-and-gun romp that is not without its flaws, but an experience that is ultimately extremely challenging and enjoyable. The game is always sending scores of enemies with difficult abilities your way from all directions, always keeping you on your toes, making combat encounters tense and thrilling. The gunplay itself is, unfortunately, a bit of a hit or miss, with the shooting feeling a little slack at times, but good level design and boss design comes together to make up for most of the game's noticeable flaws. Bullshot is by no means the perfect, beautiful, undiscovered indie gem that comes along every once in a while, but is a very enjoyable game in every sense of the word. Rubik. An almost perfect example of what a pick-up-and-play indie puzzler should be. Rubik is not necessarily heavy on content, nor is it the most complex game in terms of its interface, but it isn't meant to be. None of that is the point. It's a color-based puzzle game in which you're given control of a dice, which you have to roll through levels towards the end point while making sure the colors of your dice match the colors of the floor tiles you land on. It's simplistic, yet the level design makes sure that it's never simple, and the game somehow keeps managing to throw fresh and layered challenges your way. The concept is easy to grasp, but managing to make use of these concepts and the game becomes progressively more difficult is entirely another story, and makes for quite an enjoyable game.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.